Welcome to Creation in the 21st Century. I'm your host, Carl Baugh, founder and director of the Creation Evidence Museum in Glen Rose, Texas. Now, this program today has an incredible, magnificent palatial background as we continue with the title, Reclaiming Biology, Part 1. I say continue because the theme of our program over the years has been that there is a marvelous pyramidal dynamic to the truth regarding creation. There is an impeccable record of scientific data that shows that you were designed and created, that not only the biota, the ecosphere of planet Earth, but our solar system, our galaxy, we're precisely at the right place in that galaxy, and our place in the universe are all a part of divine design. It is appropriate that we open this new series of telecast for Creation in the 21st Century in this palatial setting. We've been transported back to the Babylonian palace of Ahasuerus and Esther. It's most appropriate because the first reference to naturalistic evolution, that is, in a written form, goes back to Babylon. And it is not a scientific document. It is a religious document called Enuma Elish. In Enuma Elish, the priest, the theologians, the politicians offered a unique explanation as to how we got here. Remember, there are four great questions of life. Who am I? Where did I come from? What's my purpose here? And where am I going? Their offering was totally naturalistic. They envisioned a superior god named Kingu, a god of the heavens, who was embattled with Tiamat, and she was a crocodilian goddess. He conquered her, divided her in half. With a half of her body, he made the stellar heavens. With the other half, he made the earth and all the living systems, according to that concept in Enuma Elish. That is the first envisionment and articulate writing regarding naturalistic evolution, and it is not a scientific concept. Never has been. It is always propped up by evolutionary theory. Now, this naturalistic evolutionary theory, we're going to learn because of a unique guest who has been with us before, and the response from the audience, from you, regarding the times I've had him show that he has a tremendous contribution to be made regarding the real explanation as to how we got here. Let me take this a step further. Knowing that we were going to be recording and taping Creation in the 21st Century in this magnificent palatial setting, I was able to acquire through the Israeli Department of Antiquities a priceless lambskin vellum scroll, a few hundred years old, a scroll of the Book of Esther. Now I have the yod, which is a silver pointing stick, because the scribes and the Levites and the Kohanim do not place their hands directly on the letters. Instead, they use a silver pointing stick. As we read this Hebrew writing, centuries old, copied very meticulously, we can read about Babylon, about the Jews in peril and captivity. We have the mention of this palace that is envisioned here in a beautiful studio setting. We have the name of Ahasuerus, the monarch. We have Vesti, quite noble in many aspects. Then we have Queen Esther, courageous. We have Mordecai, who himself was used providentially of God to save the entire nation of Israel in captivity, along with his niece Esther. Then we have the treachery in the background, and there's always the treachery in the background as we hear the hiss of the serpent, as we feel the hot breath of hell itself to destroy the Jewish people in captivity. So we have Haman, that character. There will always be characters like that opposing the Word of God, the truth of God, and accurate scientific investigation. And that brings me to introduce our very special guest that has been my guest before and by popular demand has returned. I want you to welcome to your hearts and minds Dr. Joseph Mastropaolo. Dr. Mastropaolo, it's a delight to have you back with us.
Thank you for inviting me.
You have made a major contribution to scientific investigation. In the preceding century, in the 20th century, one of the great scientific exploits ever performed was led by you as the leading scientist, in fact, the only scientist in the project of the Gossamer Albatross. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And as a biologist, as a kinesiologist, as a postdoctoral fellow in examining the potential of human physiology, by the way, your PhD is from the University of Iowa, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And I understand, I watched this at a distance. I did not know you at that time, but you were the scientist analyzing the human physique, the potential where actually human power powered a bicycle with wings over the English Channel. Is that correct?
Yes.
Would you, in a nutshell, just a thumbnail sketch, tell us about that incredible scientific experiment and success?
Man, by his power that he can produce from his muscles and his body weight, is barely able to fly, theoretically. And what we had to do was invent or discover, that would be more accurate, a method of getting more power from the human muscle. And I was always hesitant to try that out. I thought I knew how to do that. But for that project, it was imperative, and we did it. And just before we flew, we were simulating on a bicycle ergometer. But just before we flew, Dr. Macready asked me, he said, how long can the pilot last?
Now the pilot was to be pedaling and to actually move the wings of the Gossamer Albatross.
Actually, the wings would be stationary, but the propeller would give the forward impulse for the airplane.
And propelled by the musculature of the driver, the rider, the cyclist alone.
Right. He would be pedaling, which in turn would be turning the propeller. And the whole question was, how long could he last? Because there might be headwinds coming off the coast of France. We had to start from England and land in France. And so I went to my data where I had been training Brian Allen on a bicycle ergometer and drew the graph and said he can last 170 minutes. He landed in 169 and fell out of the canopy when we broke it open for him. So it was very close, less than a 1% error.
That is true scientific prediction. And as you know, in order for something to be scientific, not only is there logical investigation of the facts, an assimilation of those, and then an application with prediction. You applied all of those scientific parameters in that project.
Yes, and some of the people working on the aerodynamics didn't believe that we could be so close in biology. And they had to ask Dr. Macready if, in fact, I had given him that information before the flight. And he attested that I had. So that was how that project was won. It was an experience of a lifetime. Part of my reward was to fly the airplane later on when we got it back to the United States.
Now you flew it, but you didn't fly it across the channel.
No, I didn't.
However, I understand at that phase of your life, you actually were in superior shape. Is that correct?
Actually, I was the second person that would take Brian Allen's place if he failed. And that was a beautiful psychological condition to have him in, knowing that if he brought the plane down, this old man, double his age, was likely to be the next pilot with the next airplane.
But he did not go down thanks to your impeccable scientific investigation. I want to commend you. That is one of the great scientific exploits of the 20th century. Now, much of your life, you were trained, schooled in, and espoused evolutionary interpretation of life origins and life progressions. Is that correct?
That's correct. And Dr. Baugh, I want you and the audience to understand that was the greatest betrayal of my life, being taught that the key to biology was evolution. It was the greatest betrayal. It prevented me from doing research that I might have done at a much younger age and might have gotten much further in my life and my professional career.
And there are many young people and professional people with their doctorates, with their masters in particular studies, in research, who are literally impeded in scientific progress because of the mandate of interpreting everything and proceeding as if evolution were true.
Yes, and the most, what can I say, unacceptable aspect of all of this is that the evolutionists use censorship so that we cannot have an open discussion on this.
Well, you're attempting to change that. And by the way, how do you like the magnificent setting in which we're recording?
It's wonderful. It's just wonderful.
It's unparalleled, isn't it?
It is. It is.
And as you know, the first graphic expression of naturalism or evolutionary interpretation of life origins was essentially near the palace in Babylon, having to do with the Numa Elish as a declaration. Now, you have challenged the establishment because you have learned the truth. Tell me, before we describe your challenging the establishment, you are listed as a credentialed scientist. You have made your mark. You have proved your credentials. And at what stage in your life did you change, and what changed once you learned the great deception had taken place? What changed you?
One of the things was that I was told that I could specialize in biomechanics or physiology, but not both. And I did not listen. So I did my research wherever it took me. If it took me into the area of physics, I followed it there.
Good for you.
And if it took me into the area of biology, I followed it there. And if it were on the borderline, I would approach it from there. And what I found was a great contradiction. When I was in the area of physics, the physicists were telling me the whole universe devolves. I said, well, you can't be right. I've been told in biology the whole universe is evolving. And they said, no, you're wrong. And I would go back to the biologists, and I would say, do you know what the physicists are saying? And they would say, no, they must be wrong. And I found that the biologists would not use mathematics. And I thought, how strange, because in the whole area of engineering and in the Gossamer Albatross project, I had to use mathematics in order to make that prediction. And I said, there is something that must be resolved here. So I looked into it. And what I found was the physicists were right. The finger of time points downward.
Yes.
Everything is devolving.
That's the second law of thermodynamics called entropy. Everything, including we.
Yes, including all life forms.
Yes.
So we are no exception in the universe. We follow the same laws that everything in the universe follows.
And in the fossil record, as you know, I work in archaeology, I work in paleontology. My degrees are not in paleontology, but I work in paleontology, and we examine the fossil record. We look at the Lycopsid club moss today. That's about 16 to 18 inches tall at best. But in the fossil record, that very same plant is called Lepidodendron, and it reached stature of 120 feet compared to 18 inches today. Everything is losing potential. And our DNA is being damaged, you know, of course, as a biologist. Now, what are you doing about this? Now that a revolution has taken place in your life, and it was a catharsis in your thought process, a new beginning, assembling all the data, you have done something special about this, and our audience needs to know.
The first thing I did was what any scientist would do, and that is I reviewed the literature. I found no evidence whatsoever to support evolution. So I went to phase 2.
Now let's stop here a moment. Reviewing the literature as a scientist, as a biologist, And as a physiologist specializing in kinesiology, the structure of the human body, the musculature, the metabolism, etc., you found, as a scientist looking throughout the available technical literature, no evidence whatsoever supporting evolution. Is that correct?
That's correct. And as a matter of fact, I published 2 monographs on life in space, one for humans and one for experimental animals. I had to do that right, otherwise we wouldn't have been able to fly those flights that we had.
Sure.
They were manned orbiting laboratories and animal laboratories in space.
So you made major contributions to the space program.
Yes, and I published 22 peer-reviewed journal articles in scientific journals, some of the best in the world. And when I came with all of that and said to the evolutionists, we have to change, we have to make things correct, they censor, and they also use vindictive methods. They actually caused the high school teacher who had been teaching properly for 11 years to be fired, and when he went 40 miles away to find another job, they followed him and had him fired there as well.
That is incredible and inexcusable, all in the name of science.
No scientist, no true scientist ever does that. That convinced me more than ever that they were not sincere about what they were espousing. I'd like to show you.
Yes, and as we follow you in the steps that you have taken, our audience needs to know the difference between microevolution and macroevolution. Many of the arguments supporting evolution, or purported to support evolution, are really supporting microevolution, variation within genetic boundary. That is no problem whatsoever. We all vary, our children vary, our offspring, all living systems vary within genetic boundary. But it is a tremendous quantum leap to assume then macroevolution, that is the evolving of new genetic information that would produce a higher organism. Is that correct?
Well, I would like to make one modification, if I may.
All right.
If I may. I would like to say that there is no such thing as microevolution either. There is variation within every kind of life form, and it is the means by which every kind of life form survives.
Yes. Adaptation.
And that is being verified by our definition of lethal. The definition of lethal in biology is to kill 50% of whatever the experimental organism is. You can't kill 100%. It would take too long. It would be too long for the experiment. So what that means is the variability within every life form is the key to its success, because the survivors have built into their genetic information the information for the entire population, so that whoever survives can eventually bring forth the blueprint for the entire population. That was an idea, that was a concept that I struggled with, because I had been so brainwashed with this false concept of evolution. So I finally challenged these people. Couldn't find anything in the literature, so I said, let's put out $10,000 to see if we can elicit from them their hidden scientific evidence.
Now you need to listen very closely. Dr. Mastropaolo has made a major contribution to our generation. You need to be aware of this contribution. His insightful action we are now going to see. All right, take us through the steps, please.
I sent to the foremost evolutionists in the world, bar none, this challenge. Come to the Superior Court and prove your case with scientific evidence.
Prove that evolution has occurred, that there is evidence for evolution.
Yes, prove that evolution is science. I, on the other hand, will be there to prove that creation is science and evolution is religion.
Now, that is a major statement, because in every classroom throughout the United States and around the world, the professor or the teacher or instructor begins by stating, there is evidence supporting this theory of evolution. But you're saying there is no scientific evidence supporting the theory and concept of evolution.
None whatsoever in the literature. And when I challenge the foremost experts in the world to come forward with their evidence, they tell me, no, they have none. No, 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 no.
Who are some of these people?
Barry Lynn was on national TV. So was Eugenie Scott, the leader of the National Center for Science Education, which is a euphemism for the National Center for Evolution Indoctrination. Kenneth Miller, foremost evolutionist. Michael Roos, writing books. Richard Dawkins, Stephen Hawking. Krauss is the foremost evolutionist in Kansas. He won't come forward either. Michael Shermer, Ernst Mayr, E.O. Wilson, Ayala from UCI, Ellsbury from the National Center for Science Education, Marburger, who is President Bush's science advisor. There were 57 of these altogether. None of them would accept the challenge. Dr. Baugh, do you know what my friends call this group of people? They call them champion makers of, what can I say, widows for cows. Champion cow widow makers. And do you know why? Because they have shot the bull in every field all over the country.
That statement communicates. Dr. Mastropaolo, these are the major heavy hitters of our generation. These are supposedly the most erudite, most educated, most qualified scientific biology thinkers in this generation. And yet you're saying that when you challenge them, not a single one of them was able to produce a single point of evidence supporting evolution.
That's correct. And we didn't stop there. We went on to their organizations like the American Civil Liberties Union, National Center for Science Education, Oxford University, National Science Teachers, Institute for Biology Sciences, and the Nobel Prize Assembly, Smithsonian, colleges and universities, departments of evolutionary biology. We challenged more than 500 people, so-called scientists, in these organizations. And in Kansas, when they were supposed to bring forth their scientific evidence, they did exactly the same thing. None of them showed up.
Now, tell our audience about that. Not a single one of these erudite scientists who had the opportunity to speak for science, none showed up and in essence defaulted.
Exactly. And that's what I said to their lawyer. I said, you're not boycotting, you are defaulting, just as you did when I challenged you individually and by organization. You did not come forward with the evidence that you say you have, but you won't show it. And I'm telling you that there's $10,000 waiting for you just to show it.
And here you are, a credentialed scientist, ready to produce that. And now tell me in 1 minute, do you have evidence that creation is scientific?
I definitely have, and I'm ready to put my $10,000 with the judge in Superior Court so that I will be held to proving that. I'm ready. I've been ready for 3 years. All I need is an evolutionist to contend against.
And not a single one, from Ernst Mayr, the spokesman for evolutionary biology, to Eugenie Scott, president and director of an entire program espousing evolutionary biology, not a single one of them will take you up on a court challenge.
Correct.
And your proposition is, and I agree with you, that evolution is religious and creation is science.
Correct.
Now, we have today been witness to one of the great thinkers of our generation, who as a credentialed scientist, an experimental scientist, a professor in science, has challenged our generation of evolutionary professors to produce the evolution they claim to have, the evidence they claim to have in support of evolution that they're teaching our young people and that they're holding in sequestership the parameters of scientific investigation, he has challenged them, and not a single one of them has come forth, has even appeared to even present any kind of evidence. Now, in view of where we are in this magnificent palatial facility, it is appropriate to state that in spite of all the background, God can intervene in a special dimension. In the Babylonian arena, Nebuchadnezzar began as an incredible unbeliever, persecuting the name of God and the people of God, imprisoning those in a dimension they had never known before. And yet, God worked on his stubborn heart. And God produced one of the great testimonies of all the generations in the book of Daniel, where Nebuchadnezzar extolled the God of heaven, gave him credit for all of creation. Now, would you let God, in the midst of all the muffling sounds of evolution in a paganistic, humanistic, secular society, would you let God speak to you? Are you ready to pray this prayer? Just bow your head and pray this simple prayer with me. Dear God, I've been confused. I have bought the lie of evolution, but I want to know the truth. And I especially want to know the ultimate truth in the person of Jesus Christ. Lord Jesus, I know you're God in the flesh. I know you died, you were buried, you rose again. I know you're knocking at my heart's door right now. I open my heart's door to you. Lord Jesus, come in right now and save me forever. I will serve you with all my heart. Information like you've received today is available at the Creation Evidence Museum in printed form, in videos. We even have a coloring book for the kids. Just call or write us at Creation Evidence Museum, P.O. Box 309, Glen Rose, Texas 76043, area code 254-897-3200, or check us out on the web, creationevidence.org.